and welcome to Tech Chairs, the sports tech podcast. I'm Rebecca Hopkins, CEO of the SDA Group.
And I'm Alex Dibble, a sports broadcaster who's worked with tech startups in sports and other sectors.
This season is all about finances and failures. We're speaking to sports tech entrepreneurs about the financial journeys they and their companies have been on, the highs, the lows, and the lessons. We hope these conversations are valuable in helping other entrepreneurs and anyone thinking of taking the plunge. You'll avoid the dangerous pitfalls and set yourselves up for financial success.
This season of Tech Chairs is sponsored by Sports Tech HQ in Indiana. Sports Tech HQ, the home of sports, is building the largest cluster of sports technology companies in North America. In this industry, proximity matters. You want to be where the teams, leagues, and decision makers actually are. Indiana is home to dozens of sports organizations that rely on technology to run smarter, move faster, and stay competitive. Don't get lost in the noise. Build where the sports industry actually lives. Learn more at sthq.org.
Our guest for this episode is Benn Achilleas, the co-owner of Total Kombat. This is an innovative platform for combat sports. Benn's had multiple sports tech companies over the course of 20 years in the business, including Sport Buff. This allows audience to make live predictions and interact over the top of the video that they're watching. Benn, thank you so much for speaking to us. We'll get on to your financial challenges you've had to deal with in a minute, but why don't we start on a more positive note? You knew you always wanted to work in sports tech, and now you're a seasoned pro. So why is this sector a fantastic one to work in, despite all the difficulties?
I love that I'm a seasoned pro. You can tell that from the lack of hair and everything else like that.
Did you have hair at the start of your journey?
I did, yeah. There are some photos going around somewhere that show a full barnet on there. But it's something where growing up, everyone has that love of sports when they're watching it, whether it's team or individual. And it's about being able to be closer to that action, as a fan, and then crossing that line and then seeing how it ticks and works behind the scenes. And, that was a big driver for me from the early days of setting my businesses up and thinking, well, where do I want to go? I want to work on things that I enjoy. Look, most people have to work anyway. So if you're going to do that time, you're going to do the hours and the frustrations. You may as well do it on things you love. So for me, that was absolutely, sports where we started.
And you started quite early on. You see, this is kind of the only industry you've properly worked in. You were telling me that you started your first sports tech company when you were still in college.
Yeah.
So at that stage, how much financial acumen did you have at the time, and therefore what was it like to set up a sports tech company without that acumen?
Yeah, it was a challenge, but it was, again, early on there's a lot of passion, and where you don't have that knowledge, you've got the energy, and as you get older you realize that the importance of the knowledge to be able to channel that energy, and I think that's something which so many founders go through. For me, especially in the early days, it was launching with a laptop in my best friend's loft, and we were then hitting the phones in the olden days as well when you used to call people.
No.
And it was a lot of hard work, but it was something where it was probably harder because we didn't have that kind of financial acumen in terms of how to really scale the business.
And so what were some of the mishaps that you might have made in those early stages that you would never make now?
I think as a founder, a lot of times the superpower often is scrappiness. And it's about how do we make everything work 10 times harder and sweat these kind of assets or beg, borrow and steal whatever I can from people around me. But part of it is necessity. So you're also then sometimes you're looking at the bottom line and you're saying, okay, this person's a bit cheaper than that person, so I'm going to go with them. But as you maybe become a bit more experienced, you realize the value of sometimes you pay a bit more for a service or a consultant or someone else like that. But actually what they bring is exponentially more value to your business, and they help you avoid 5 of these other blockers, delays, or obstacles that you would hit. And that's definitely something which now I look at is anyone that I'm working with, how do they help us shortcut? Even if it costs more money, how can we move quicker? Because ultimately that is the key thing for any startup at this point is it's runway and it's time. Whether you're doing that on your own money, investors' money, or anything else, it's you need to build momentum and move fast as quick as you can. And if you can get people who help shortcut that, that's the value.
I think that's a really excellent point. But I think conversely, when you are young or inexperienced in the sports sector, I've seen young businesses or people who are just desperate to fast track their success by false promises as well.
Yeah.
Have you got any advice for people, when somebody is pitching something to you and you think, oh God, that's the silver bullet? How do you actually sift the snake oil from the good stuff when buying in those services? And what's worth the investment? What is a nice to have?
It's really easy. There is no silver bullet. There is no shortcut. There's loads of snake oil out there. And again, it comes to that when there's a gold rush, the people who get rich are the people selling the shovels and the picks. And it really frustrates me when I see so many startups or founders where they're at the beginning of their journey and then they're bringing on these different consultants or advisors and handing out wads of equity or thousands every month in terms of retainers on the promise of where they're going to go.
And for people coming into the sector, because I mean, I say this again and again about sport is so nuanced. It's only when you work in it, you realise how many facets there are to it. When you set up, how many of those sorts of surprises came in waves at you and you thought, didn't know the industry operated like this?
Yeah, it's a constant learning experience, and even now with Total Kombat, but previously with Sportbuff, when we're working with FIFA and all of these broadcasters around the world, and often you'll be on the outside of it and you'll see the money that gets spent, say, on a footballer's wages and think, oh, there must be so much money in these clubs. And then you go into them and you realize behind the scenes is a very, very lean operation. And there's lots of creative ways how they find to work with different suppliers. And these will be bits where they'll catch you out because it isn't a traditional kind of transaction model where it's like, okay, here's my price, you buy it for this. Typically, there's it's much more nuanced, and it will be looking for ways where it delivers, or there's a revenue share on the different value that's done, which again, for an early stage company can be difficult. If I'm going to get paid over here and maybe versus actually cash in my hand, kind of right now. So a big part of it is also just being ready to be agile and being creative, trying to find ways to get it in there and be able to pick up these clients.
And when you first had that experience of going in and thinking, there isn't as much money on the other side of the table as I thought there might be, did you then have to go back and scratch your head and go, might need to recalculate our figures here in terms of like how long we might be able to last, or how much we have to give in this area or that area in order to make this work because of that slight maybe miscalculation?
Every time. And it always takes longer than you expect, and it always costs more money than you expect. And the worst thing you can do is just mentally kind of shortcut how much time it's going to take, and then you're caught short in 6 months' time, whether you're then having to go back to your initial investors and say, look, we're going to need more money, because firstly, you don't know you can count on that, but also it doesn't look good. At the end of the day, they've trusted you to be able to deliver within that time frame. And if you haven't, it's harder then to get them on board and harder to get new investors on. And if you're doing it without investors and you're doing it off of your own back and buck, you need to be aware of, well, how much time am I committing to this? It's a beautiful day outside. How many times have we all sat inside while everyone else is outside playing, and you're like, oh my God, when do I get to go out and play? And by the time you are, it's dark and that's it. But those are the days and the nights, and it's how much can you put that in, because burnout is very real as well for so many founders.
I wanted to touch on what you said about the financing and whether you're doing it on your own buck. And that journey is a very tricky one, because when you've got a few businesses behind you, you can be that much smarter about how you do get it financed. And the number of people we've spoken to over the years who've said, oh yeah, I gave away 15% equity in return for free office space, and those kind of things. You did what? Now that you've done this a few times, have you got any tips or advice to people as to how to release investor funding as efficiently, whether that's as early as possible, or how you maximize it for limited amounts of the equity that you give away? What's been the real learning there for you that you think, if I'm passing on something, this is what I tell the next people I consult to do?
Equity is a great carrot for everyone, but definitely you don't want to be in a position where you've given it away and don't have much to show for it, especially down the line. So I always tell people now it's about linking that equity to some kind of performance or deliverables as well, and then put it in a structure which is really simple to do. So whether it's an option scheme, so based on people hitting certain milestones that then actually they unlock that equity, or even if for more experienced people, they might want the actual shares in hand, as it were. And so creating a reverse vesting agreement. So you're really helping me out. I'm giving you 10% of the company, but as an agreement, I'm expecting you to be able to deliver X, Y, and Z over the short, medium, and long term. And subject to you delivering that or not delivering it, then there'll be different kind of pullbacks, clawbacks from the equity that's given. You don't want to be in a place down the line where you've built something fantastic, you're finally getting traction because it all takes years longer than you expect, but actually you've already given away 50% of the company, and you're not even speaking to half of those people because of different fallouts that have happened as well now. But you need to go back to them and try and get signatures because you're going to be raising your scale funding at this point. There's so many messes that can happen in that way. And I think just making sure that you take a little bit of time, first of all, and think about what that journey is going to be, who do you need to involve, and then plan how you release that equity in a sensible way.
We're getting something different out of each person we speak to, which is really great. And one of the things I thought would be lovely to dig into with you is the differences between particular markets across the world and how that might be able to trip you up. Just for our benefit, could you just list the different markets that you have operated in over the course of your 20 years, if you can remember them all?
I mean, globally, even recently with SportBuff across the FIFA World Cup, we were appointed and to deliver the fan engagement and gamification exclusively there. Suddenly, you're engaging with 120 different broadcasters, and they call them MRLs, media rights licensees. And it's incredible, whether it's from New Zealand to India to Colombia to the US. Everyone wants to deliver the best show that they can for the World Cup, and some of them will be taking that kind of world feed, and others will be building their studios around it and everything else. But then you become aware of these other commercial pressures, and a good example is that, say, if you're doing something, or we worked across the Cricket World Cup with India versus Pakistan, suddenly you're looking at a platform where you're going to have tens of millions, if not more, people sort of hitting it at one go. And for Buff as a technology, because it was live predictions, you have this kind of thundering herd issue where, and especially in sports, you'll be amazed the amount of people who turn on to a game 30 seconds before kickoff. And so you don't have this nice slow ramp up where servers can, casually turn on. You've just got like 10 million people hitting you in one go.
It's like releasing Springsteen tickets.
Yeah, Taylor Swift tickets, I think. It's Taylor Swift problems, yeah. And but then, so you need the infrastructure to handle that. But from a kind of commercial perspective, the value of a fan in India and Pakistan is significantly less compared to, say, the value of a fan. And I'm talking about revenue that you can generate here in the US or in the UK. And that's where it's about finding that balance, because you might have a great product that everyone wants, but then from an infrastructure side, you might not have built it to actually scale at that level efficiently, where you can make value back from those audiences. So even though you're available globally, you're then having to look at, okay, well, what markets can we really focus on and make profit from?
And what's the balance to be struck between, I've got a product here and it can be used in a match at a moment where it could be like 1 billion people watching, but the return might not be, the profit margin might not be huge, but hey, come on, it's 1 billion people, versus, the profit margin will be much bigger over there. But how do you make those trade-offs, those decisions?
Well, that's where you need to be aligned on what success looks like for you and for the stakeholders, because that might be investors, it might be other people in the team. And the example that you said there is like, yeah, that'd be great, we've got 1 billion people on, but if you then get a bill from AWS for $400,000 and you haven't got that money to pay, well, that's the end of your company. But great, you got 1 billion people to use it at one point. So a lot of it is about momentum. It is about being able to show that we've got this engagement happening. But you also, the flip side is, you're running a business. You need to make sure that you are in there for the long haul. Despite chasing that moment, you don't want to burn all of your firewood in that one go. You need to make sure that you're able to keep that business running for months and months.
And did you ever go into another market somewhere in the world without knowing quite how that market operated or how it was different to the markets you'd already experienced, and therefore think, wouldn't have done that if we'd known that before going in?
Not necessarily that we didn't know, but we definitely went into some markets where we would look at taking a client or a customer as a kind of loss leader and appreciating, okay, we're not going to be able to cover all of the costs that we want, maybe on that first activation or that first client, but because they're a flagship client, that kind of opens up the market for us, and then we'll be able to pick up, the profit as we spread in those other areas. So I think it's just, again, trying as much as possible to go in eyes wide open and appreciate the nuances in the market. And it's always tempting as a founder to sort of say, well, look, we're just going to get this customer, that customer, that customer. And, really you need to be thinking about, from a business side of things, the value.
I'd like to ask 2 questions about that. First of all, we see a lot of that where people have gone, right, I'll go loss leader. And, as soon as I've signed, insert name of big brand, the domino effect will kick in. How successful has that been as a strategy within your businesses?
I think within the market overall, it tends not to be that successful.
Right.
And you'll see a lot of businesses where they put everything into securing this one client and then kind of wash up on the rocks because it hasn't then had that domino effect that they had anticipated. And that can be for a whole variety of reasons. And again, from speaking personally with SportBuff, where when we secured the World Cup through this massive global RFP process that took a long time, but as it should do, with FIFA and HBS going through all of their due diligence on there. Again, you look at that you've got the World Cup, and that is the ultimate kind of calling card that you can take in there. Then what we saw was that was great for broadcasters and organizations at a top tier level, but then if you're having conversations with that next tier down or 2 tiers down, there was a sense of, well, we can't work with you because you've worked on the World Cup. The budgets must be up here. The cost must be up here. It's so disconnected from their day to day. And yet, whilst we had the same product that could scale for multiple markets, you're hitting psychologically against this kind of barrier for everyone who isn't in that kind of elite level of sports.
That's interesting. And then The other question that I wanted to ask was about those cultural subtleties, because I can remember somebody years ago saying to me, if you want to sell to America, sound like an American. How true are those nuances market to market?
This is where I need to be careful and not sound like, but it's something where that a lot of the stereotypes or sayings are there for a reason.
Yeah.
And definitely Americans like to buy from Americans for a lot of their kind of products and services. And that was in my companies, that's always been the successful route of recruiting boots on the ground in the territory. But I don't think that's just specific to Americans. Again, when we've gone to Latin America, I think it's always important making sure that we've got people which are there in that time zone, able to speak that language natively. As a Brit, my ability to speak English is challenging, but going beyond that doesn't really work either. So it's really important, I think, to be able to have people locally who can respond in real time in the right time zone, in the right language.
That moment you mentioned where you'd had this, you're bringing FIFA's on your sort of company's CV, and yet people then see that and go, oh, maybe they're too big for us, essentially. I just want to dig into that a little bit more. How do you go about psychologically swerving that and actually saying, no, don't worry about what we've done? And how do you do that?
Yeah, it was a frustrating learning, because you're kind of like, this is the World Cup. If we can do that, we can do anything. But it's then just being able to address that with those people. What we ended up doing there was then using some of implementing some other activations which were at a much lower level, and being able to have that kind of secondary calling card. So look, we've been able to do this across second division football, or across drone racing, or something that they felt they were above in the nicest possible way.
Sure.
So we kind of had both ends of the spectrum covered.
And that's always a great approach with sales. But in the sector, in the sports sector, sports tech-led innovation space, there's often that mismatch, isn't there, whereby you've got incredibly visionary people who are creating amazing solutions, trying to sell them into people who maybe aren't of an equivalent degree of sophistication in that particular space. That can be a challenge, along with immense price sensitivity. How much of that, both within SportBuff and now you've moved beyond it, do you think is an issue? What's the trend? Is it getting better? Did you think it'd be better by now? What's your view there?
I can't name any names because otherwise...
No, but we wouldn't want you to.
I think my feeling is it's getting worse.
Yeah.
And it's getting harder. And I believe, well, I've seen firsthand, there's a whole tier of a kind of middle management who will be influencers on the sign-off or decision-making process, where actually they don't really care. They don't really care about the innovation. They all think it's great. Often they'll stand up in conferences and they'll talk about, this is what we need to do, and they'll say all the right words, and then you'll be following it up. But actually their day job is just making sure that everything keeps going as it is. And so it's not about sticking their head up. It's not about exposing themselves to the risk of backing a startup, which then messes up and then it blows back on them. For a lot of these people, they've worked the career path. They're now in a place where they're content. They just need to stay where they are. And what we introduce is risk. Yeah. And even though we always look at it from this is fantastic, you should be doing this, and here's the value it can bring. For a lot of them, they do believe they should be doing it, but then they also look at all of the effort and workload that's involved on their side. I'm going to have to go to this person, that person, and I'm going to have to be the hero, the ambassador. I'm going to have to have all of those discussions, and then they're going to come back and they're going to give me all of this hassle, and then it's going to take time to implement it, and and so all they're looking at from their perspective is frustration and headache and accountability. And the other option is they can sort of do nothing or say no, then they don't have to worry about any of that. So that's where the challenge for us is how do we create something where someone actually thinks, okay, it's worth me taking on all of that extra stuff, which I'm not going to get paid for, because my company isn't going to pay for it, but they can believe that it's really going to move things forwards.
And how do you think that safe space for saying yes can be better created?
From our experience, it's about finding out those pain points and finding out the objections as soon as possible, and then building your sales strategy around that. Too many founders will just naively expect, okay, we're gonna, I'm gonna take it there and they're gonna say yes and it's all gonna be great. But then when things aren't progressing, there's almost like a fear of trying to find out why, or what's the problem, or who's saying no in the organization. And actually what you're getting there is knowledge. You're getting that feedback. That's the most important thing, is this feedback loop that you can build, that so many founders don't, because whether it's from a fragility in terms of ego, or it's like a stubbornness or a pig-headedness of sort of thinking, well, look, they're the idiot because my product's great and it's going to solve all their problems. And it's like, well, you know what? They're the customer. And what you need to do right now is to just try and get information out of them. And too many people go in and try and do that hard sell on that first meeting and think they're going to close it. And it's not about that. It's just about discovery. Just spend time, build relationships. So much business is done with just human relationships. People buy from people that they know or that they like. And it's about building those relationships and getting more information. So you can do that sale, but it's not going to happen tomorrow.
And is there a danger that if you go in too hard with the pitch, that you end up with the worst of both worlds, which is a no, but a no that doesn't provide an explanation, so you don't get the learning from it either?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, again, it's just about the more you can build those relationships, the more leeway there is for you to be able to get that feedback, and for people to feel comfortable of saying, look, I really like the product, but here's my issue, or here's what I'm going to face internally, or here's the problem that we've actually got. And that then leads into another part where you need to be really clear on what your solution is and what you're doing. It's fine at some point if you think, okay, look, we're going to have to pivot because actually through feedback, we found here's the problem and we thought it was this. But what you don't want to do is what so many founders do, and I've done this before as well, is you get what you feel is kind of your showcase client or your dream client, and then they'll be like, oh, what you've got is great, but what we also want is X. And suddenly it's like, oh, well, we hadn't planned on doing that, but we can do that as well. We'll add that as a feature or a service. And what you're doing there immediately is devastating for your business. It's pulling you off. Instead of us going this way constantly, suddenly we're getting pulled off here. So we're going to end up over there. We're divesting our resources, our finite resources that we've worked so hard to build, whether it's funding money, our own money and savings and different team time. And suddenly we're putting more and more into this, which isn't even part of where we're going. And it's so tempting to do that because you want to secure that client, you want to show that you can do it, but it's the worst thing to do.
There's a lot to be said for dating before you get engaged, isn't there?
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely.
I want to ask you, because you've done something quite punchy in that you've almost not quite sacked yourself from your own business, but having put so much into starting and scaling up Sport Buff, you've now not walked away because you obviously still invested.
Yeah.
But you've decided to start something new, which is a very bold decision. But I'd like to talk about the whole thing about the mindsets involved with founders, starting, staying up, scaling up, exiting or growing. What do you think of the qualities, and what made you think, right, time for the next thing? I need to make my life hard again.
See, that's really interesting, because to me, it's making my life easy.
Yeah.
Because the more that I've done that, now I realize what stage of the business I enjoy, and what part I'm good at.
Yeah.
And then with Sport Buff, after 7 years, and again, there's I've got so much love for what we've built, and where it's going is fantastic. But at that point, so much of my time is then doing board calls and HR and so many of the other things, rather than actually just working on the product and working closely with some clients, say like on the World Cup, where you're in the trenches, and they're the bits from me where they excite me. The earlier stage of a business, where you can make decisions quickly, you can adjust the product on there, you're working really closely with clients, and I now appreciate that there's people who their career as a CEO or other stuff is running much bigger companies and dealing with the kind of the compliance and the shareholders and the boards and the HR and all of these kind of other things.
You mean you don't love that?
But those people are really important, and it's important to be able to get those people into your business.
And kudos to you for getting the business to the stage where you need that stuff.
Yeah, well, it's a kind of needs must, and I think that's where it's being mature enough to then just say, you know what, actually, I've got the business to this point, but I'm not the guy or person who is going to be taking it to that next level. That's just not me. I don't enjoy it, and there's other people who are much more experienced at it and would be better at it. And so that's why I wanted to step out, to make my life easier.
I thought that You've Done Something Really Punchy was a brilliant pun about Total Kombat, but it turned out it wasn't that at all. So you have that knowledge now, which is what I'm good at that bit. I'm good at that stage. But back in the early days, didn't have any of that knowledge. So what kind of mistakes can founders make there when they need to be 20 years older, but they're not, and you can't manufacture that?
That's where I think now there's even more opportunities for founders to be able to balance that. And it's about identifying really good, experienced people who are able to support them in a few key ways. So there is now like a fractional CFO that I work with across different businesses. She's phenomenal. She just does a couple of days a month, but is able to add so much value. And again, in the olden days, I've done everything myself because you have to. And so you're creating the business models, the P&Ls, you're working on the tech, on the UX and all of these different aspects. But then actually being able to bring some people in on a fractional level. And because of how the world is now, a lot of those people are sitting at home. They're happy to be able to kind of like dial in. They're available on a much more flexible basis. Whereas in the olden days, it would be like, okay, well, who's willing to be able to come into London, and do a couple of days in the office? And you've got all of these extra costs and considerations, and geographically, you're much more restricted. Whereas now, the ability to build a really powerful, almost like executive team around you that is fractional and isn't restricted geographically is an opportunity that's available to founders now that they should really tap into.
Yeah. And have you ever been in a position with any of the business where you do feel like you've hit a rut, or you're wallowing, or you've either run just a little bit out of oomph? And if so, have you got out of that? How do you reignite and go again?
I wouldn't be kidding if I said thousands of times that I've been in that rut, that ravine, that canyon at the bottom of it. But that is part of the life of a founder. You have great highs, you have really bad lows, and it's just about being able to pick yourself up and get going and understand that, you know, tomorrow is another day. We can do something different. You know, as long as you're able to stay in the fight, there's an opportunity to be able to make a difference, to be able to make that change. Set some targets, so you're not in the trenches and making decisions blindly all the time, and say, okay, in 6 months, the business needs to be here, and draw up your list of criteria for what you feel is worth carrying on for another 6 months. And in 12 months, we need to be here, because it is a little bit addictive being a founder. And sometimes you're in there and you just keep pushing and you think, oh, just one more day, just one more week, one more client, we're going to make this difference. And suddenly you're not necessarily making the best decisions strategically. You're doing it based on that kind of instinct or that need, because you're in there and you're doing it. So you always need to be able to have a kind of clear plan as to what criteria is worth my time of carrying on with this.
Ben, thank you so much. That was wonderful.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
The STA Group exists to be the link between suits, tracksuits, lab coats and wallets. Thank you again to our sponsor, Sports Tech HQ, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Oh.